that had been given to them. And so there's this understanding that what made the break in England permanent is Henry's decision to dissolve the monasteries, because the nobility had a vested economic interest in ensuring that England never went back to the Catholic faith. The English church at this point, though, it's important to remember the English church at this time is in schism. It's not officially in heresy. It hasn't fully embraced the Protestant Revolution. Remember, schism is the failure to recognize the authority of the Holy Father in Rome. And that's in essence what Henry has done here. He's placed himself as head of the church in England, and he's refused to recognize the authority of the Pope over the church in England. That is schism. That is not heresy. Eventually, because Henry remained a very loyal Catholic in terms of doctrine. He never preached or had preached throughout his realm any doctrine that was contrary to the teaching of the faith. He not merely, but he wanted himself to be recognized as the supreme head of the church in England after his desire to divorce Catherine. So that is a schismatic act, it's not a heretical act. The church in England would not move into heresy until the reign of his son, Edward. And we'll see that when we'll talk about that whole story and how England moved from being in schism to being in heresy in our next time period, the time period of the Catholic Reformation. Henry ultimately dies in 1547. He had 3 children from his 6 marriages. Mary Tudor from Catherine of Aragon. Mary was born, baptized, and raised a Catholic. Elizabeth from Anne Boleyn, and she adopted and embraced Protestant tenets. And also he had a son, Edward, from his 3rd wife, Jane Seymour. Now, Edward was only 9 years old when Henry died. So a regency council was placed in effect to rule for him until he came of age. And it's under the reign of Edward that Thomas Cranmer, the secret Lutheran, will really begin to enact certain measures that take the English church from a position of schism into heresy. And when England left the church, it was a great event, and really a bad event for the Catholic Church. And we see at the end of this time period of Protestors and Defenders that the church was defended against the Protestant Revolution by many heroic men and women that the Holy Spirit called to occupy that role in the history of the church. But unfortunately, she's in a very weakened state as a result of the revolt of Luther in Germany, of Calvin, and now also the leaving of England. And so now what we need to see and what needs to happen in the church is a reformation. The authentic Catholic Reformation will come about in our next time period, where men and women will be raised by the Holy Spirit to authentically reform the church and address all these abuses that led to the Protestant Revolution. And we'll talk about that when we meet next.
More interesting stuff going on there with some schism that we're seeing obviously in England, King Henry VIII, and saw a lot of interesting things going on in the New World in Mexico with the Aztecs as well, and Our Lady of Guadalupe. So any questions, comments, thoughts on anything from the presentation?
I never knew that Catherine of Aragon was Ferdinand and Isabel's daughter.
Mm-hmm.
All the whole life I never knew that. That was a revelation.
Yeah, it's interesting how the royals from the different countries tended to intermarry like that. It was the way that they could consolidate power, and it was a pretty common thing. But yeah, that obviously had influence on decisions that were made, and so it was.
Well, Ferdinand and Isabel were so devout Catholic.
Right, and Catherine was as well.
Yeah.
And so obviously
That's why she was fighting what was going on.
Yeah, she didn't want a divorce, and Henry unfortunately did. Ended up splitting the church. So, and wanted to say thank you. They brought in some charts back here if y'all want to take a look. There's this chart that explains or describes how churches split off.
Well, from the heresies at the beginning, these are charts. My wife and I, we used to have a Catholic bookstore in town, and we used to carry these, and they're out of print now. But you can see all the way from the beginning when church was started, and you can see the heresies, and you know how we studied Arian and Arius, and you see the black on the left coming out of the top where the red was, and those were all of the heresies, and just continued all the way down, and the churches ultimately on the right-hand side listed there.
Yeah.
And it's all in one spot where you can see it. And I found a guy up in Connecticut a few weeks ago. I've been looking again, trying to find more of these because they're out of print. And he had some of them in a warehouse. And so I just got them last week.
Yeah.
And so I gave Patrick one as a gift for running this class for us.
Thank you very much. That's awesome.
Thank you.
This is a really good pictorial example of what has happened throughout history. And when you go back, you know, what do you notice? Where's Christ? And where's the only church that comes from Christ? You know, it's the Catholic Church. And that's something that a lot of Protestants, a lot of people in our country don't know, don't realize, don't think about. Because if we're going to say that we are followers of Christ in the church that he established, well, when we go back in history, we can see that there is only one church. And, you know, that goes to the statement of to go deep in history is to cease to be Protestant. You know, so just something to keep in mind. But I'll leave it back there for everyone to take a look at if you'd like. It really is a good example, and you can see where especially all the Protestant denominations came from later on, you know, in this time period and beyond.
Now, is that printable?
Can you duplicate it?
Can I duplicate that with permission?
I'll give you one.
Okay.
I don't know, the man is trying to get them reproduced. They had a big flood in this warehouse that ruined 3,000 of them or something. And so he's trying to get them reproduced, and he's trying to pay an artist to create a rendering of it. For whoever would like one, I will bring one next week.
Because my son-in-law, one of my sons-in-law, can print that.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, that size.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Well, I tell you what, I have a smaller one that I think would be handier. He had two sizes originally. One was about this big, and then that one. I have to see if he's got because I've been in conversation with the guy. I can see if he will give us the authority.
Copyright or,
Sure.
Yeah,
You know.
permission.
Well, I can have
It was
done.
made a long time ago.
I've
back in
seen
the-
other things like that out on the internet as well, so if we're not able to, then I may be able to pull some printouts off on the internet and bring those in as well. So.
Okay.
But that's a great tool, so
It
thanks
is.
for bringing it in. Okay, so we've got some questions. We've got 5 questions this go round, and just as per usual, we can go through and talk for a couple minutes, you know, look at them for a couple minutes and then talk for a couple minutes on them. The answers to them are on page 169, so you can take a look at those if you go through. Do you want to do questions or not? Okay, that's fine. So if between the 4 of you all, if you want to do a question, I can do 1 and 2, and if you want to do 3 and 4,
Okay,
if you all
that's
want
fine.
to do question 5, and then we'll get back together in a couple minutes.
but this is still,
Huh?
Yes.
It just didn't feel like it today.
very definitely is. I think, I agree with our on children are rain, definitively, just, and
Yeah, that's,
incredibly
yeah.
thankful, because if they had not, just lost their lives,
Secret.
I think,
We've just gone there.
I mean, just to say, that, it was not easy, but they were the reasons stuff.
Well, the fact that you got there, you saw the commitment and sacrifice for them. Hey, Jacob, we should look out.
Just an idea. You want to talk about more?
Yeah. Well, they said mine, they they were satanic. Because they were sacrificing to their sun god and another god. Yeah.
I think what I get confused about is there's still tie-ins between faith and people who rule, where there's such strict separation. So, yeah, I don't know or change
Position, is that a church position?
He became the, he split from the Catholic Church. He started the Church of England.
Well, we were as a
Yeah, like judge.
He became the head of the church. And all the kings and queens changed. Will you see that?
Just before we
Whatever happened.
I don't know. The first one.
Yeah.
I don't know. I know she was very Catholic, but we don't know. I don't think anything was said. I could probably Google it and find out. I'm sure.
Right. Isn't that interesting? Theologically, they're not. Mm-hmm. Because they don't believe, and these don't believe that Jesus is God. Jehovah's Witnesses don't believe Jesus is God. That's it. The Mormons, there's a whole thing. I never understood exactly why. They don't believe that. They don't believe Jesus is God.
Somebody's look up this. I don't know.
Another minute or so, and then we can. Yeah, sure, we did. Both him and Thomas More. It's a difficult thing to do.
That's what I was saying.
Sure.
It was interesting when we asked tonight, I had that thought. I can't remember exactly where we the creed or where it was, but all of a sudden I had this flashback of being thankful
Well, that's their
for
big
all of
thing,
these
but they are
people
their own
we've read
church.
about. It's like, this is making all of this
Yeah,
news.
Salvation Army is
Realizing
a
we
church.
wouldn't have this today. I mean, I
I
know the
don't
Holy
really know
Spirit
that
would
much
somehow
about
make
it.
it happen. Through them, but
Yeah,
it's just incredible
but no,
what
they
people
have
gave
they
so
have
that
their
we
own
can
religion.
have our faith.
Yeah, I mean, they really were the instruments of the Holy Spirit, and the Holy Spirit gave them the strength to persevere, to be tortured, to keep the faith, and to be our examples. And so, yeah, I mean, we owe so much to them. We really do. So, Okay, so let's go ahead and get started then. So question number 1 and question 2, I'll cover those. Hilaire Belloc described John Calvin as the one who began the war against joy. Who was John Calvin, and why did Belloc describe him that way? So, as we heard, John Calvin was a Frenchman, and he accepted Protestant teachings, and he moved to Switzerland, and he wrote the Institutes of the Christian Religion in 1536, and that kind of articulated his beliefs. He moved to Geneva, and he established a Christian theocracy, and we heard about what that was like living under those rules. Very strict, very harsh. Among that was what Belloc playfully described as the war against joy, because it was very harsh and repressive. There was no singing, no dancing, no jewelry, no makeup. All the people had to name their children after Old Testament figures, so it was very harsh and difficult to live in. So Christians were required to confess their sins to a magistrate in a court of law, and because of that, obviously, Belloc viewed it as a very much a very difficult environment to live in. So that's why he called it the war on joy. And what was the importance of Calvin in his teachings? Question number 2. So he was extremely important in the Protestant Revolution, because where Luther had started with some ideas and had kind of begun the wave, Calvin really continued it, and he continued it in a way that moved things forward, because he produced a church, a creed, and a discipline. So he really formulated the Protestant Revolution and moved that whole movement forward. He established a hierarchically organized church in Geneva. He wrote his creed, which was the Institutes, and he developed a way of life. And so we see that Luther was really instrumental in moving that entire area towards Protestantism. So that's kind of what the whole Protestant movement hinged on, was getting the organization down so that people would be assimilated into that culture. So.
But Patrick, isn't it amazing that people went along with that?
Yeah.
It's such, kind of like Hitler.
He was a very charismatic person, and so, that was one of it. But along with that, he was also very autocratic and dictatorial, and so obviously you couldn't go against him. And as he started to gain more power, like Hitler, people realized, whoa, I can't speak against this, and things continued to get worse. So there were many that supported him, but there were also those who didn't, but they didn't feel free to stand up and say, wait, I don't like this. So, yeah, that's...
Well, they'd be killed.
Yeah, exactly. So, so question number 3. Evangelization efforts in Mexico before 1532, although vigorous, only produced 200,000 baptisms. In a 4-year period from 1532 to 1536, 1.3 million people were baptized. What happened to affect such a significant change?
Our Lady of Guadalupe.
Yeah, there it is.
Appearing to Juan Diego in 1531.
Mhm.
I did not know Bishop Zumarraga worked very hard and did some excommunicating for people who were antagonizing the Aztecs. And the one pyramid, we went down there a couple of times, and one pyramid in the city, I think, was the pyramid that they offered up 80,000 over 4 days. And the tour guide that we were with said that they thought the city of the Mexico City was on fire, because there was so much red running down the side of that pyramid, and as the sun was shining on it, it looked like it was on fire. And and so and then I had heard that the same time the 7 million had left the Catholic Church in Europe, 9 million came into the church in that